It's Wednesday, October 22nd. I want to thank Eric for filling in for me yesterday. I was traveling. I actually drove from Chicago O'Hare down through central Illinois yesterday afternoon, and I couldn't help but notice how windy it was. It was kind of looking at the low pressure system and the wind here this morning over northern Michigan. So the winds were blowing like perpendicular across the roadway when you're going quick on the interstate. That can be frustrating. It's hard to pass as you kind of get by trucks. There's wind currents. All the cars were getting blown around and made for a frustrating drive. You kind of had to be, locked in, if you will, the whole drive, just making sure your car was staying in its lane. And as frustrating it was new. I mean, we haven't had a lot of wind. I remember thinking to myself, man, this is the first time I've really noticed the wind in months across the Midwest, let alone, Illinois. And we have a low pressure system. We haven't seen a ton of those moving through the Midwest this year. I will say the good news about that lack of wind over the last month or two is we've had drought classifications increasing. We had tremendous harvest activity and pace over the last 3 to 4 weeks across the Midwest, getting into the Ohio River Valley. So I'll take the lack of wind with that respect of keeping that fire risk down. We did see quite a few field fires, but I don't think it was nearly as bad as our concern was maybe going into September and October, given the lack of wind, which can really ramp up that fire risk in a big way. And showcase this in another way. I picked on Madison, Wisconsin, kind of near O'Hare there. And if we look at wind history for this year, so just looking at year-to-date daily maximum wind gusts. Now, it's not, sustained wind. It's not the perfect way to do this, but it gives you a pretty good proxy for has it been windy or not, like it was yesterday. And it's hard to kind of see trends looking at the bar chart, all the way across the year, but you can certainly start to see one if we were to average this out. So here's January 1st. Here's the most recent date. And starting in winter and going into spring, you notice that uptick in winds, especially in March and April. This was one of the windiest springs on record for the Midwest, Wisconsin included. And so that tightened spray windows and application. A lot of people noticed this. We had a lot of severe events through here, so it wasn't, necessarily just severe wind gusts. It was also just fair weather days that had high wind. Now, that predictably dies down every year in summer, but it's just stayed that way. Look at August, September, even getting in October, just no uptrend in the wind until very recently, just the last few days. And then myself just noticing it driving down. So it kind of shows you that increase in atmospheric momentum, not only across the whole globe, but the Northern Hemisphere and North America. And we've seen that momentum fall much of the year, and it started to pick back up in October. This map isn't totally up to date. It's through the 21st, and that's rising quickly. It might even be higher than that here today or into tomorrow. I'm getting much closer to this average line here. So momentum picking up more so, more low pressure systems, I think more wind in the forecast. That happens anyway as we get toward Halloween in November, but more support for that coming from the atmosphere as well. If I back up and look at infrared satellite here this morning, you can see that low pressure system spinning over the Great Lakes here, some showers moving through New England. We have another cutoff low here by California, bringing some just spotty showers here to portions of the Central Valley, maybe the Central Coast as well. I do want to jump over and show you the all hazards from NOAA that showcases that frost advisory that's been issued and put up across the Midwest, portions of Illinois, Wisconsin, Iowa, northern Missouri, even into central and eastern Kentucky, now kind of toward the Lexington area. A lot of those frost advisories, like Mississippi River Valley and east, are for more so tomorrow morning, on Thursday or Friday, whereas these here over Nebraska, Iowa, kind of western Minnesota, more so for right now. If I let's update this, see if they filled in a few more. No, not yet. But if we look at current temperatures as they're recording near 6 a.m., down toward freezing here on the Missouri River between Iowa and Nebraska. Look at Sioux Falls at 28 degrees Fahrenheit. You warm up going east of there, so mid 40s across much of the central and eastern Corn Belt here. But tomorrow, those temperatures coming down. So if I show you the forecast for those low temps tomorrow on Thursday, that's the 23rd, mid 30s in Indiana, western Ohio, Illinois, low 30s up into Wisconsin. There's that freeze threat. And then even into kind of Lexington and eastern Kentucky, looking at a decent frost chance tomorrow. Central Missouri is kind of the cutoff here, maybe like Columbia, and south looking at less of a frost chance, but certainly much colder tomorrow than it is this morning. And that continues on Friday, maybe even colder for a lot of those areas I just mentioned. Notice Lexington over towards Cincinnati, down toward that freezing line. It would not shock me if we get down to 32 or 31 in a wide quarter here because the winds are falling. I just mentioned that uptick in winds, but winds tend to keep overnight temperatures a little bit warmer. They mix up the air. They have fans in California on a lot of the orchard and the fruit crops because they can mix out that inversion, and it keeps temperatures up 4 or 5 degrees. And that can make the difference between a hard, killing freeze and not. And so if we look at the winds now, we can see them blowing quickly west to east, bothering those interstate drivers like myself. But I'm going to take this into tomorrow. Look at those winds die down, especially right in here. So I'm not surprised to see that like 31 and 32 over Lexington and Cincinnati, because you have much calmer winds there. Still some winds, staying up over maybe like Illinois and northern Indiana, where temperatures might not bottom out quite as cold. If we look at the last 24 hours of precip, just some light showers spinning around that low pressure system that I mentioned in Michigan. Had a thunderstorm complex move through central Mississippi with some rumbles of thunder there. I want to back this up. I think the best way to showcase kind of the conversation Eric and I have been looking at this week with respect to this cutoff low is actually looking at the 500 millibar vorticity, and that is looking at mid-level spin in the atmosphere. And I'll be honest with you, I often start my day looking at this plot here just to get an idea of where the main drivers are of our atmosphere. That spin in the mid-levels of the atmosphere often is the best producer of lift, driving our low pressure systems or high pressure systems alternatively. And if we just look here this morning, let's do 7 a.m. Central Time on Wednesday near the recording of this video. We have that cutoff low over California. If we jump back and look at radar, we can see some showers here over the Sierra Nevada foothills, some here over the Central Coast, just a few getting into like the lower Colorado River Valley here. If I jump back, we're going to be watching that migrate across the Four Corners region. Here it comes over Arizona here into tomorrow. Comes off the elevation on Friday evening. Starts pushing into Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas. We're expecting rainfall later this week. Into Saturday. Now into Sunday. And here comes that Pacific jet extension we've been talking about, for 2 weeks at this point. This is related to that mountain torque event that we talked about. Now, this little low, there's been various kind of forecast disagreements whether this would get, pulled up into this extension, this much deeper trough and low pressure system, or if it would kind of stay on its own. And some of the recent model runs, Eric mentioned this yesterday, are kind of keeping this more so on its own for longer. What I mean by that is we're all the way out to like Sunday now. It's still just kind of spinning over Arkansas and Mississippi. It sort of gets washed out underneath the split flow in front of that extension. And this other piece comes down in and settles more so into the mid-south and the southern U.S., and this other piece goes up north. So we almost have kind of, think of a little atmospheric block here over Ontario, over the Hudson Bay, and that's keeping this area a little bit drier in the latest forecast updates. We can see that just looking at like the 7 and 10 day precipitation anomalies, where this is starting to go a bit drier in this quarter here, whereas the forecast before were showing that low kind of meandering up into Illinois this weekend. If we look at big picture 500 millibar heights and just looking at the wind speeds around them, there's the trough associated with the low pressure system over Michigan that's moving east through New England today. Again, if I jump back and show you the radar, heavier rain moving through Massachusetts, portions of New England, across the Great Lakes as well, some showers there, even some lake effect showers coming off of Lake Erie there, Michigan, seeing some of those as well. But there's that cutoff low, and there's that big Pacific jet extension as a product of that mountain torque that we talked about, almost 2 weeks ago at this point. Now, if I play the forecast forward from the ECMWF, you're going to see that precipitation trend in the models here. So here today, expecting just additional light showers across the Sierra Nevadas, maybe even some snow at the upper elevations. That tracks through on Thursday through the Four Corners region, some snow through the Colorado Rockies. And then really by Friday, early Friday morning, even getting into like 7 a.m. Friday Central Time, heavier rain spreading across Oklahoma, southern Kansas, behind that British Columbia, our next low pressure system coming into the Pacific Northwest associated with that Pacific jet extension. This is going to be much more potent than some of the recent systems, I think. That activity continuing into very early Saturday morning. Rainfall now spreading across the Dallas metro area down through central Texas. And look at that. That is quite a bit of rainfall for an area that needs it. I mean, if I could show you the biggest precipitation deficit for like late summer into fall, it'd be like this area here near Houston. We had rainfall recently through here despite how dry we were, in portions of like Missouri, Illinois, over toward West Virginia and Pennsylvania. So looking forward to folks down here getting some moisture. But deep low pressure system coming on shore now in Oregon and Northern California with an atmospheric river likely. Play that forward. Look at, that's an impressive low down below 990 millibars now, just west of Washington. Continuing rain here in the mid-south on Sunday. Play that forecast forward, and you notice this one's still on its own. It's not getting pulled up like some of those early model runs had it, getting more so into the Midwest. So that's just kind of tracking now even into Monday through the Midwest. Here comes that Pacific jet extension coming off the Rockies. Produces another, initial low here along the Central Plains, but it's that split flow, that blocking almost over the Hudson in Ontario, that's forcing the low to kind of go up here into Manitoba and forcing another piece of it to stay in the south. And so you'll kind of see that, split in the flow here, keeping rainfall in this corridor here. Again, they need some of it here. We've seen drought build in here. Plenty of rainfall over here with multiple low pressure systems off that Pacific jet extension. And you get all the way out toward Halloween and staying dry. And this corridor here, you're staying dry across the southwest, even portions of like West Texas. So it's a little bit different than the forecast showed, maybe 3, 4, 5 days ago. We'll talk about Melissa at the end of this video. This is the remnants of it. We're way out into the forecast here, so I'm not going to claim that it's going to be right there. But Melissa is looking impressive for a tropical storm here this morning. But if you jump to the end of the video, you'll see some slides on that. I do want to jump over and just look at the next few days. So with that cutoff low coming off the elevation in New Mexico, you can see marginal risk out from the Storm Prediction Center, New Mexico, North Texas. A similar area on, this would be Thursday and then Friday here. Excessive rainfall risk picks up on Friday through the southern plains, so like Dallas-Fort Worth area, up in Oklahoma City, more so just indicative of heavy rain coming for this area. Not too concerned about flooding yet, but we'll have to keep an eye on that. And then if we just look down at like the 7-day precipitation forecast, like I'm looking at 5 of them here, ECMWF on the left, the AIFS in the middle, GFS on the right. This is the National Weather Service, the WPC, and the blend of models here. And you'll notice that looking closely at these, you're starting to see some of the model runs. Look at the ECMWF for the next 7 days. Actually dry in this corridor here all the way through central Minnesota into southern Ohio. That's not the case in all the models. Some disagreements on how far north some of that rain gets. And quite a spread through that little corridor there that I just highlighted. Where there's not much disagreement is through the Mid-South. So Louisiana, Arkansas, East Texas, an area that really needs a lot of rainfall. In fact, I'm seeing some of the forecast values in here getting up near like 3.5 inches. I know it's hard to see like the individual amounts on the screen here, but you're getting close in East Texas to like 3 or 4 inches of rain, which is their deficit really over the last 60 days. So working back a lot of that drought is likely in the next 7 days. The other area of focus, just looking at these 5 maps, look at the Pacific Northwest from like Eureka, California, north up into the Willamette Valley, all over toward the Seattle-Tacoma area up in British Columbia, west of Vancouver. I mean, just extreme rainfall amounts associated with that Pacific jet extension as you get up into British Columbia, but shows the potency of that low pressure system. And then the last area of focus, again, we'll talk about this at the end of the video. Look at the far bottom right corner of all of these forecasts. There's the remnants of Melissa likely coming up through the Caribbean at some point later in this forecast next week. And we'll have to talk about that for the risk that maybe it pulls back toward the west. But the south getting plenty of moisture, and it needs it. If I just look at the last 30 days of rainfall departures from average, I mean, with the rainfall that we've had through the Midwest and New England over the last 30 days, that's helped to walk back some of the drought concern there. Not totally, but it's certainly helped. The south, even portions of the southeast over toward the Carolinas, have been drier. And that area I focused on here, you can see just how dry we are. 4 or 5 inches below average over the last 30 days. That's significant. Your drought classifications are going to ramp up quickly in that corridor. Eric just talked quite a bit yesterday how with that background La Nina state, we're worried about this kind of corridor here staying drier this winter. So getting some needed moisture in here over the next 5 to 7 days. Okay, I want to jump back and look more so at the long range. So I took the forecast all the way out to Halloween. We mentioned Melissa, just a few slides left, and I'll cover that more in depth here. But I'm looking at the ECMWF ensemble because I want to take this forecast. I'm going to get it out to Halloween quickly because we kind of covered up what's happening before that. We'll take us there, get that low, moving across this week across the Four Corners, gets out into Texas. That precipitation, even a little bit of a sphere chance increased, remember, on Friday. That excessive rainfall outlook, that moves into the Mid-South this weekend. That Pacific jet extension, the last few slides has come on shore in the Pacific Northwest. So heavy rain late Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for the Pacific Northwest, British Columbia. Remember, this cutoff low kind of stays disconnected from that parent low, not getting swung back up in the Midwest. And we actually have this decent, strong ridge here over Ontario, the Hudson Bay, kind of blocking the flow from getting into the Midwest like we talked about. But that still slides in late next week. Trough trying to slide into the Midwest, maybe bringing up precipitation chances for the upper Midwest late next week into Thursday. Cooler temperatures now coming into the eastern U.S. late next week. Precipitation chances linger along the jet stream, kind of flowing around that trough like this. And so if we jump over and look at, let's look at the ECMWF precipitation anomalies. If we look over the next 5 days, there's that Mid-South precip that we talked about all the way down to the Gulf Coast, Pacific Northwest. Let's take this out to 7 days. See better coverage across the entire Southeast. That split, that we talked about moving up into the northern plains briefly. Take it out 4 to 10 days, still not seeing this area fill in. And then finally the full 10-day anomaly. Very wet for the Pacific Northwest, wetter for the south and the southeast all the way down to the Gulf Coast and many of the forecast runs here. But if we do jump over, take it all the way out toward next week. This is now Thursday. I'm going to take it into Friday. Here's Halloween proper. And we start to get a decent signal for a deep trough in the Gulf of Alaska, warm, ridging over the west, and a subsequent trough over the east. What I'm not seeing here critically is that sort of T&H pattern that I was worried about earlier. It does look like it initially, but that would be more so a trough here, pumping colder air into the central part of the country, wetter and through this quarter, but drier further to the south, especially with a ridge here somewhere over like Florida or Cuba. Maybe something like that ridge is over there. This ridge is also more settled in maybe the Four Corners and less so directly over the west. So this isn't like the classic positive T&H pattern that, I'm maybe looking for more so in December as driving our winter weather pattern. This, I think, is just what Eric often calls just the, sub-seasonal week-to-week variability and the jet stream likely connected to that East Asian mountain torque, which is, causing large changes in the MJO right now. I'm not sure if I have that pulled up. Yeah, dude, there it is. There's the MJO, which has been very quickly, ever since that mountain torque got underway in East Asia, has been racing through phases 2, 3, 4, and 5. That's expected to continue here this week until it dives back into null space. So I just think we're seeing kind of week-to-week variability in the flow right now. And this isn't necessarily indicative of the winter pattern yet, but it does mean that Halloween weekend and thereafter, looking at warmth and drier conditions returning to the southwest and California, which has been relatively active over the last kind of 14 to 30 days. And seeing that a little bit, if I take the forecast further, you kind of see that pattern staying a bit stagnant. Now, as it relates to temperatures, we talked about temperatures already this week, kind of falling across the Midwest, pushing into New England a bit as we get later into early next week. And then if I take the forecast out, we're like Thursday to Friday. I know I'm doing this quickly, but you can see temperatures falling by Friday morning of next week. That deeper trough diving into the Midwest, getting back near that frost line across a lot of these areas across the Ohio River Valley up in the Midwest and the upper Midwest. Now, if we look at the 8 to 14 day precipitation departure with that kind of trough settled in over here, see more precipitation for the east, some precip kind of along it as that low initially develops across the upper Midwest. There's going to be a dividing line here going back over dry, as Eric mentioned, across the southern plains, and the southwest going dry as well. So with that trough here over the Gulf of Alaska, we keep the flow into the Pacific Northwest. With this trough here across the east, we keep flow into portions of New England. There's Melissa showing up on the 8 to 14 day departures. And that's the regime we're looking at now. Again, not necessarily, I don't think, yet indicative of the broader winter pattern right now. And this is relevant to the west because that kind of positive T&H pattern where we do have that trough sometimes near the Gulf of Alaska can speak to a drier winter in California. And if we look at the PNA, which often shows us the kind of prevalence of that ridge over California in the western U.S., it does go markedly positive next week. This takes us like literally all the way peaking out at Halloween with a very strong uptick in the PNA signal. But notice we're not seeing it kind of linger up here. We're seeing it fall later into the forecast, kind of returning back. In fact, the operational run even takes it, pretty far negative. So again, I don't think this is necessarily, this pattern that we're in now is very much kind of just active transitory fall pattern and doesn't speak to the entire winter quite yet. If we look at the precipitation panel, let's pull this back up a little bit. I'm mostly focused on, getting out into next week toward Halloween where you see the much cooler temperatures moving in through the east. I will mention that these forecast runs don't have, wildly anomalous, rare cold air getting into the southeast, so not expecting, at least at this time, a widespread deep freeze across like the mid-south into the southeast or even like the Ohio River Valley. But it's certainly going to be on the cooler side, and I think a lot of locations that have been waiting on a frost or freeze, more so in like the Midwest or getting toward the Ohio River Valley, are likely to achieve that over the next 15 days or so. Okay, I do want to touch on Melissa as I wrap up the video here. If we just look at Melissa visually, it did get named a tropical storm yesterday by the National Hurricane Center. It looks really impressive, at least just in terms of like deep tropical convection. Very, very cold cloud tops. They're all like right around one another here. You can start to, if we look really closely, see maybe a mid-level center. I'm struggling to like visually identify these thunderstorms are moving around one another. They seem to just kind of all be going up together, maybe right at the end there, but I might be seeing things. The low-level center, you can kind of make out these low clouds here, is likely displaced a little bit further west. You can almost kind of if you look at these low clouds wrapping around, you can almost kind of extrapolate that the center might be a little bit west of that deepest convection there. So the system's still likely decoupled, which is delaying its more rapid intensification toward a hurricane. But I mean, by all accounts, visually, a very impressive tropical storm. Even if we zoom back and look across like the whole northern hemisphere, I'm going to pause it there at the end. I mean, it's the most impressive looking thing visually, save for this weak low across Michigan. I'd give this the award for the most impressive looking thing on this side of the Western Hemisphere right now. And I'll just play that again. You can see overnight that this is often the case because of tropical convection over the ocean, but it increases in intensity overnight. And you're seeing that here early this morning before the sun comes up. There is, I will say, considerable uncertainty with Melissa going forward, more so than there usually is, even with some of these kind of early tropical storms, because we do have this little trough. It's hard to see here. We have a weak trough kind of near the west side of Cuba. That's going to be lingering in the area and be kind of slowly tugging on Melissa here. There's already a little bit of westerly shear over it right now, causing that decoupling. If you look really closely, you see these kind of clouds coming this way. And these ones here are moving more so that way in the upper levels. So there's that weak trough. There's a little bit of westerly shear over it now. And as it kind of slowly meanders northwest, it's going to feel some of that shear, and it's going to intensify rather slowly and organize slowly, despite how impressive it looks now. And as it gets to like this point south of Jamaica, that's really the pivot point. We're watching, is it going to move west into Central America, or is it going to move northeast toward Jamaica, eastern Cuba, maybe even Haiti? Can't rule out, getting a little bit closer to the Dominican Republic. Or is it going to kind of linger more so just in the Caribbean before turning back over Cuba? Because the longer it waits down here, I think the stronger it will get, because the water temperatures we looked at are very warm. As you get further out into the forecast, the shear lessens. And it could become, this has the potential as it meanders toward the northwest to become a very, very strong major hurricane by accounts of a lot of these model runs. And if we just look at like absolute ocean temperatures across the globe right now, I mean, the Western Pacific is often the warmest sea surface temperatures on Earth, but the only other region you could, hold a candle to that right now might be the Caribbean. Very warm temperatures, getting up to like 87, 88 degrees Fahrenheit. Not quite like warm bath water, but maybe like getting toward lukewarm at this point. So plenty of fuel for this hurricane as the shear lessens in the forecast. And I'm going to play these ensemble forecasts forward here. This is from polarweather.com. Has a lot of cool features. Notice meanders toward the northwest. And then there's the split. You notice all the different ensemble members just kind of diverge. It's like a balloon popping as we get out into the forecast here. This is taking us 3 days out. Some of the models, you notice, went back to the west. Some initially take it across Haiti, would be a concern for there this weekend. And then some of them push it all the way over towards Central America. It would likely be weakening at that point. But a lot, maybe the majority, you can see that kind of via the heat map here. The majority of members here, even like up toward like 30, about 30 of them, keep it over the Caribbean, where it's likely to continue to strengthen because we don't have a lot of shear there, before making that curve back northeast over Cuba. And this could be a problem for Jamaica, it could be a problem for Cuba, both wind and rain. And then if it gets all the way up into the western Atlantic, then we're talking about a potential curve back toward the west. That is a remote possibility at this point. We're looking all the way out at Halloween at this point, but there are a few members that do something like that. But again, that's well out into the forecast here. I think the biggest story to watch with this is, I know there's a lot going on in this, but if we look at some of these individual members, particularly the members that have that initial pull back toward the west and then that recurve to the east, are very strong. Getting up in a major hurricane status, moving west of Jamaica into Cuba here. So this could be an impressive storm. After it gets out near Halloween into the western Atlantic, we'll have to keep an eye on it. There's that member that took it into North Carolina as a weaker hurricane, but we'll have to keep an eye on it. It gets out in the western Atlantic, maybe for Bermuda or the east coast of the U.S. about a week and a half from this recording. So a long way to go with Melissa, but boy, it's just pretty right now, spinning in the southern Caribbean. Impressive system, despite just being a tropical storm. I will leave it there today. I think I have one more slide. I did want to mention, one more slide here. If we look at the last 7-day change in sea surface temperatures, I mean, we've been showing this for like 3 weeks now, and the dominant kind of trend in portions of the Pacific has been cooling off of these temperatures here. And that continues to be the case. So impressive cooling across the Northwest Pacific, portions of the Eastern Pacific, where we've seen this high develop north of Hawaii thanks to that Pacific jet extension. Seeing some warm up here, but boy, we're going to get a lot of lows pushing through here over the next 7 to 10 days. And so I think that's going to continue to cool the waters here. Seeing some cooling over in the Indian Ocean and then near Japan. And then La Nina. Well, La Nina has been, almost trying to strengthen in the last 2 or 3 weeks. We're starting to see some warm up on the east side. So that strengthening of La Nina might be calming down a bit as we go through the end of October here. And that might be relevant to see when this La Nina peaks and starts to weaken. I'm not seeing like any signs of imminent weakening right now, but at least if you look over at 3.4 where we define La Nina versus El Nino, we're not seeing La Nina strengthen anymore here in late October. So it seems to be maybe hitting that kind of weak peak that we talked about, a weak La Nina before rising up again later this year. If it starts to rise as we get into like November, December, that's going to rearrange some of these winter forecasts quickly. Not seeing that right now, but it's something we're going to keep an eye on. That's a big pivot point. I also want to see how this pattern shakes out in the 2nd to 3rd week of November. Like I said, I'm skeptical that this kind of positive P&A, the West Coast ridge, is going to define our winter pattern yet. I want to see more so as we get that pattern into December. I think a lot of what we've seen recently here is that mountain torque and that Pacific jet extension just making its way through North America. I'll leave it there today. Eric will talk with you all tomorrow. No, I will talk with you all tomorrow. Eric will talk with you all on Friday. Thanks for watching.